Elias adjusted the rearview mirror, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the drawing taped to the dashboard. It was a crayon masterpiece of a stick figure man with a huge smile holding hands with a smaller stick figure girl, a bright yellow sun beaming over them. Sophie's work. His anchor. In the back seat, Clara Hayes sat ramrod straight, the sharp lines of her blazer a stark contrast to the worn upholstery of his 7-year-old sedan. She was staring out the window, her phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, the city lights of the early morning blurring past. For 3 months, this had been their ritual. He would pick her up at 5:30 a.m., a thermos of black coffee waiting in her cup holder, and drive her to the gleaming downtown tower that housed her tech empire. They rarely spoke beyond a clipped "good morning" and a curt "thank you." He was the driver, a quiet, unassuming man in a slightly too large jacket. She was the CEO, a woman carrying the weight of a corporate war on her slender shoulders. He knew more than she thought. He heard the hushed, frantic phone calls to her lawyers, the strained arguments about contractual obligations and fiduciary duties. He heard the exhaustion in her voice when she thought no one was listening. Today was different. The tension in the car was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered the quiet hum of the engine. "The hearing is at 9, she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Everything depends on today," he just nodded, his eyes on the road. He knew. He had heard the name Sterling whispered with a mix of fury and fear for weeks. He navigated the traffic with a steady, practiced calm, a small island of peace in her swirling storm. When they pulled up to the curb, she didn't move immediately. "Elias," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Wish me luck." He met her eyes in the mirror. They were filled with a profound weariness he recognized all too well. "You don't need luck, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice low and even. "You just need the truth to be heard." The next day, the tension had sharpened into a blade. During the drive, Clara's phone rang incessantly. Elias could only hear her side of the conversation, a series of clipped, anxious questions directed at a man named Davies, her lead counsel. "Are you sure you've reviewed the codicil in Appendix B? Sterling's lawyers will twist it." "No, I don't think a settlement is an option. This is my company." She hung up with a frustrated sigh, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. Elias remained silent, a ghost behind the wheel. He took a slightly different route, one that bypassed a notorious traffic snarl. A small, unspoken act of care. As she was gathering her briefcase, her gaze fell upon a book tucked into the door's side pocket. It was a thick, heavily used textbook, Advanced Contract Law. Its corners were softened with wear, and dozens of thin, colored tabs poked out from the pages like a faded rainbow. She frowned, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her anxiety. It seemed Southwest out of place, a relic from a different life sitting in the car of a man who drove for a living. "Is this yours?" she asked, gesturing toward it. Elias glanced down, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "Yes, ma'am." "Just some old reading." He offered no further explanation. The moment passed, and she was out of the car, her focus already on the battle ahead. But the image of the book lingered. It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture she had formed of him, the quiet, reliable driver. A simple man. She had been so consumed by her own world that she'd never once considered the depth of his. The thought was unsettling, a small crack in the carefully constructed walls she kept around herself. For the first time, she wondered about the men who brought her coffee every morning, the men with Sophie's crayon drawing on his dashboard and a complex legal textbook in his door. The evening before the final court date was the worst. A storm had rolled in, mirroring the tempest in Clara's soul. Elias arrived to pick her up from the office late, well past 10. The building was a hollow shell, but a single light burned on the top floor. He found her not in the lobby, but standing just outside the revolving doors, her face pale in the sodium glow of the streetlights, rain plastering strands of her hair to her cheeks. She looked smaller than he'd ever seen her, stripped of her corporate armor. "He's offering a buyout," she said, her voice hollow. "A pittance. An insult. He wants me to walk away from everything I've built." He was Sterling, her former partner and mentor, the man now trying to get the company they had started together in a garage. "Davies thinks I should consider it. He says the case is complicated." Elias listened, his expression unreadable. He held an umbrella over her head, a silent protector against the downpour. "He's using Section 4, isn't he?" Elias asked quietly. The dissolution clause tied to intellectual property transfer. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. How? How did you know that? He shrugged, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked pavement. I overheard you mention it once. The language in those clauses is often intentionally ambiguous. They rely on the assumption that no one will challenge the primary interpretation. His analysis was so clear, so concise, it sounded like it came from a seasoned attorney, not a driver. She stared at him, the rain, the late hour, the impending corporate doom all fading into the background. My lawyer, with his $1,000 an hour fee, hasn't been that clear in 3 months. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What else do you do, Elias? When you're not driving? He met her gaze, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of an old sadness, a life lived before this one. I make my daughter's lunch for school, he said softly. And I try to make sure she knows she's safe. The morning of the hearing arrived, gray and unforgiving. Elias drove in complete silence, the thermos of coffee untouched in the cup holder. Clara's focus was absolute, her jaw set. They pulled up to the grand, imposing steps of the county courthouse. The air was thick with the weight of consequence. I'll wait here, Ms. Hayes, Elias said, his usual parting line. She nodded, her mind already inside, and walked toward the massive oak doors. He watched her go, a solitary figure climbing the steps to fight for her life's work. He settled in for a long wait, the worn legal textbook lying on the passenger seat beside him. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was her. Elias, her voice was a ragged whisper, laced with pure panic. He's not here. Davies. He's not answering his phone. His office says he had a family emergency. He's gone. Elias's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what that meant. Sterling had gotten to him. Bribed, threatened, it didn't matter. The result was the same. I'm on my own, she choked out. The judge is calling my case. They're going to grant a summary judgment. I'm going to lose everything, Elias. Everything. He could hear the shattering of her composure, the raw sound of a fighter finally brought to her knees not by a fair blow, but by betrayal. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Sophie's smiling drawing seemed to watch him. He thought of all the mornings he had seen Clara's exhaustion, her quiet determination, the fundamental decency he sensed beneath her corporate armor. He thought of Sterling, a man he'd never met but whose cruelty he had heard in every panicked phone call. And in that moment, a decision he had made years ago, a promise he had made to himself, was broken. Stay right there, he said, his voice a low command. Don't say a word to the judge. I'm coming. He hung up, put the car in park, and got out, leaving the keys in the ignition. He walked into the cavernous courtroom, his simple driver's jacket and worn work pants a stark anomaly in a sea of expensive suits. The room was heavy with tradition and polished wood. At the plaintiff's table, a man with silver hair and a smug, predatory smile, Sterling, leaned back in his chair, radiating victory. At the defense table, Clara stood alone, her posture defeated, her face ashen. The judge, a stern-faced man with weary eyes, was speaking. Ms. Hayes, for the final time, where is your counsel? The court's patience is not infinite. If you cannot produce representation, I will have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff's motion for summary judgment. Sterling's smile widened. Clara opened her mouth to speak, likely to concede, to beg for a continuance she would never get. Her shoulders slumped in surrender. From the back of the courtroom, a voice, calm and clear, cut through the silence. Your Honor. Every head turned. Elias stood in the aisle, his hands steady at his sides. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He stopped directly behind Clara's chair, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She flinched, turning to see him, her eyes a mix of confusion and desperation. Sterling scoffed audibly. Who is this? Her driver. The judge peered down from his bench, his expression a mixture of annoyance and intrigue. And you are, he demanded, his voice booming. Elias looked directly at the judge, his gaze unwavering. He then looked at Clara, whose world had just been torn apart. He saw her fight, her integrity, and the injustice about to be done. A quiet fire lit in his eyes. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from him before. I will defend her. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of shocked whispers. Sterling let out a short, barking laugh of disbelief. You're going to defend her? This isn't a traffic ticket, pal. This is corporate litigation. The judge banged his gavel, his eyes narrowed on Elias. On what grounds, sir? This is a court of law, not a stage for theatrics. Are you a licensed attorney and a member of the state bar? Clara stared at Elias, her heart pounding. This had to be a mistake, a noble but insane gesture. He was her driver, a kind man who read old textbooks. This was madness. Elias didn't flinch. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a worn, cracked leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a small, laminated card. He walked to the clerk's desk and placed it down. Elias Vance. Bar Association number 7-4-3-2-1, he stated, his voice steady. Admitted to the bar 12 years ago. My status is currently inactive, but it can be reinstated with a simple motion, which I am making now. The clerk picked up the card, her eyes wide. She typed the number into her computer. After a moment, she looked up at the judge and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the room. Clara felt the floor shift beneath her. Elias Vance, her driver, was a lawyer. I was an associate at Latham & Watkins, Elias explained, his voice devoid of any pride, stating it as a simple fact. I left the practice 10 years ago when my wife passed away. My daughter needed a father more than the firm needed another lawyer. The judge leaned forward, his expression transformed from annoyance to profound curiosity. He looked from the card to Elias, then to the shell-shocked Clara. Mr. Vance, he said slowly, this is highly irregular. So is counsel abandoning their client on the day of a dispositive hearing, Your Honor, Elias countered respectfully. All I ask is for a 30-minute recess to confer with my client. The judge granted the recess. Elias led Clara into a small, sterile conference room. The moment the door closed, she sagged against it. Elias, what is happening? You're a lawyer. He nodded, his expression gentle. I was. It's not who I am anymore. I'm Sophie's dad. He pulled out a chair for her. But right now, it's what you need me to be. She sank into the chair, her mind reeling. The quiet man, the coffee, the worn-out car, it was all a deliberate choice. A sacrifice. Why didn't you say anything? She whispered. It never came up, he said simply. And I wasn't looking for a job. Now, we don't have much time. Tell me everything Davies missed. Tell me what you were most afraid of Sterling using against you. Her shock began to recede, replaced by a desperate, flickering ember of hope. She started talking, the words pouring out, about the ambiguous dissolution clause, a series of emails she thought were protected, a verbal agreement Sterling was now denying. Elias listened, his focus absolute. He wasn't taking notes, he was just absorbing it all, his eyes closed for a moment as if committing every detail to memory. He asked sharp, incisive questions that cut through the legal jargon and got to the heart of the matter. He saw angles her expensive legal team had completely overlooked. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was brilliant. The 30 minutes felt like 5. As they stood to go back into the courtroom, Clara stopped him, her hand on his arm. Can we actually win this? He met her gaze, and the quiet driver was gone. In his place was a man of formidable strength and conviction. He's counting on you being broken, Elias said. He's counting on the law being a weapon for the wealthy. But the law, at its best, is a shield for the truth. And the truth is on our side. When they walked back into the courtroom, Clara Hayes was no longer standing alone. She stood beside her counsel, Elias Vance. Elias began his argument not with a roar, but with a quiet, devastating logic. He didn't grandstand or posture. He simply laid out the facts, weaving a narrative of partnership, trust, and ultimate betrayal. He spoke of the company's founding principles, quoting from the original charter that Sterling himself had co-authored, a document filled with lofty language about integrity and shared vision. Then, he called Sterling to the stand. Sterling swaggered to the witness box, shooting Elias a look of contemptuous pity. Elias began his cross-examination gently. Mr. Sterling, you and Ms. Hayes built this company together, correct? From her garage. That's right, Sterling said, preening. I provided the capital and the business acumen. She had the technical ideas, and you were partners. Equals. Elias pressed. In the beginning, yes. Elias walked toward the witness box, holding a single piece of paper. I'd like to draw your attention to an email you sent to your personal financial advisor a week before you filed this lawsuit. An email your previous counsel failed to disclose, but which was recovered from server backups. He placed it on the projector. The courtroom screen lit up. The email was damning. In it, Sterling boasted about a cleverly worded clause he had insisted on years ago, calling it his golden parachute escape hatch that would allow him to get the company for its IP and leave the shell for Clara to clean up. Sterling's face went from smug to sheet white. His high-priced lawyer leaped to his feet, shouting objections, but it was too late. The truth was out. Elias's final question was delivered in an almost conversational tone. Mr. Sterling, you testified under oath that your lawsuit was about protecting the company's future. But this email says your intent was to get it. Which one is the lie? Sterling sputtered, his composure shattering completely. He was trapped. The judge stared at the email on the screen, his face a mask of cold fury. He banged his gavel with a resounding crack. Judgment for the defendant. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. And Mr. Sterling, I suggest you retain a criminal defense attorney. This court will be referring your testimony to the district attorney's office for investigation into perjury. The aftermath was a blur of muted chaos. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, shouting questions. Clara ignored them all, her eyes locked on Elias. He was already turning to leave, his duty done, ready to melt back into the quiet life he had chosen. Wait, she called out, hurrying to catch up with him. Elias, wait, he stopped, turning to face her. The adrenaline was fading, and he just looked like a tired father who needed to get to his daughter. I don't know how to thank you, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. I want to pay you. Whatever your rate was, I'll triple it. I want to hire you, give you an office, a team. He held up a hand, a gentle smile touching his lips. That's not necessary, Ms. Hayes. I didn't do it for money. Then why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because it was the right thing to do, he said simply. And because Sophie's mother always told me to stand up for people who are being bullied. He checked his watch. I have to go. I'm going to be late picking her up from school. He started to walk away again, heading toward the parking lot where his old sedan waited. He was just going to leave. After saving her entire world, he was just going to drive away. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over Clara. The company, the money, the victory, none of it mattered as much as the men standing before her. She had spent years building an empire of code and commerce, but her life was empty. In the past few hours, this quiet driver had shown her more integrity and courage than she had seen in her entire career. Can I come with you? She blurted out. He stopped, turning back in surprise. What? To pick up Sophie, she clarified, a blush rising on her cheeks. I'd like to meet her. Elias studied her for a long moment, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes for the first time. Okay, he said softly. Yeah. I think she'd like that. The school playground was a world away from the cold marble of the courthouse. It was a symphony of joyful shouts and bright colors. Sophie, a small girl with her father's kind eyes, came running the moment she saw him, leaping into his arms. Daddy, she squealed, hugging him tightly. Then she peeked over his shoulder and saw Clara standing shyly a few feet away. Who's that? She asked. Elias set her down. Sophie, this is my friend, Clara. Clara knelt to be at the girl's level. It's very nice to meet you, Sophie. Your dad is a hero. Sophie beamed with pride. I know. He makes the best pancakes. They spent an hour at the park, pushing Sophie on the swings and watching her clamber up the slide. Clara felt a lifetime of tension melting away. She watched Elias with his daughter, saw the unconditional love, the easy patience, the quiet strength that was his true nature. This was the real man, not the lawyer, not the driver. Just a father. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara made him an offer. Don't be my driver anymore, Elias, she said. Be my partner. Not in the boardroom sense, unless you want to be. I'm restructuring the company. I need an in-house counsel, someone I can trust. But more than that, I need a conscience. your hours would be your own. Sophie always comes first. No exceptions. He looked from Clara's earnest face to his daughter, who was now holding Clara's hand, completely trusting. He saw a future he hadn't dared to imagine, one where he didn't have to choose between his past and his present, between providing for his daughter and being there for her. It was a chance not just to work, but to build something new. A life. A family. I think, Elias said, his voice full of a warmth that matched the setting sun, we would like that very much, and as the three of them walked away from the playground together, silhouetted against the fading light, it was clear that the day's most important victory hadn't been won in a courtroom, but right here, in the simple, hopeful space between three hands clasped together.